Today we're going to be talking and continuing and really finishing on the power. Now we've talked about the power of the Holy Spirit, we've talked about the power of God, we've talked about the power of Jesus, we've pretty much covered the Trinity. Now we're going to talk about your source of power in your life, in your Christian walk. We're also going to talk about, because let me just get onto that for just a little bit. Because you can be led by a different power than what you think you're led by. Do you, when you answer that question in your mind, do you just naturally say, well, my power is from God? Because a lot of times it is. But there may be a season in your life or a time in your life when you're led by a different source of power. Now, we're going to go today and talk about different sources of power and what they bring forth in our life. How they can change us, how they can change our situation, our variables, and when we're led by the right power, always that outcome as well. We're also going to talk about our problems. How many of y'all have had a problem? I've had a problem. I can stand up here and have my Bible in my hand and say, I've had a problem. I've had a bad habit. I've had a huge bad habit. I've had a minuscule bad habit, whether it's not fully cleaning the dishes before I put them in the dishwasher. That is something that my wife and God worked on me for years, and sometimes continue to work on me with, to finish. Well, don't wash the dishes with just water. You can use soap, but that's a bad habit. That's a problem I have. Now, we are going to look at larger problems. And these sometimes can represent in our lives like a chronic illness or a disease or something very large. They can also be everything in between. But we're going to look at our problems. We're in a small group today. So, it kind of has that let's talk about our problem setting. So we are going to touch on our problems. We're also going to look at what to do with them, how to hand them off to God, and what we kind of fall into another trap into with our problems and how we can handle it. Now, I have the whiteboard behind me, and even if a problem is like a bad habit, like I have a horrible habit of when I'm preaching or talking and I'm just standing, I tend to walk a lot, like back and forth like crazy. And yeah, you know it. And like someone had said one time, you should wear a Fitbit because we could track the miles of when you're on stage. So today, because we do have our camera here, and we also have our whiteboard here, I get to teach more than preach. And I tend to wander a little more and move, because I want to, when I get excited, I tend to move when I'm preaching. So this is going to be a teaching one, and I'm strapped here, so it's not like watching tennis where your eyes are going back and forth today. Jim, not to pick on you, remember when we first started to go minister to people and we'd be out and about and you would clear your throat like every fifth word? But that was just a little bad habit, the same as my walking. And over time, you got over that, but you even said, I can't believe that I continue to do that. It's just a habit. So we're going to talk about some bad habits, some problems like these. They can be from big to small. But let's start with our little whiteboard here. And I'm going to take you back and channel my inner high school math teacher today. We're going to talk about our problems. So let's look into it real quick. And we're going to use an equation. So you know how you have substitutes, so it's going to be some shorthand here. So we're going to have P equals, when we write down P, we know that P equals our problems. Now, this doctor handwriting that I have without the degree or the knowledge, but I do have the handwriting. So we have P equals our problem. And then we're going to have U. This is going to be a very hard represent the U here, so follow with me. U is going to represent you. Yourself. I know, your mind's blown. And then we're going to have God here. And so what's going to represent God in our equation through most of the day, most of the message today is infinity is going to represent God for our equation, or negative infinity, because God is both negative and positive. We're going to use that today in our illustrations. So you guys have the handout. It's a little 5-page pamphlet on there. Thank God for Staples and Costco, so we can print out all the paper. And for those that are going to see this on the video, I'm going to post a presentation at the end of it, so you can follow along. But that is also why we have the whiteboard. I like to teach why I do it, because as we get more into it, sometimes the slide won't cover everything, and I just want to make sure we all cross there together. Questions are always encouraged during, so we're going to get into it real quick. So we have our P equals problem, U equals U, and God is going to be represented by the number from calculus or most math, infinity and negative infinity. It's been a good time erasing today, but luckily you guys do have the handouts. So let's go on. So why do we have problems? And what's your problem? God created us more powerful than the majority of our problems. Now we're going to reference this in Genesis 1, verse 26. That should be an easy one to find if you have your Bible and you'd like to open it. Genesis 1, 26. On pretty much the first page of Genesis. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Let him have dominion over all the fish of the sea, over all the birds of the air, over all the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." Now see, right there he gives us authority, he gives us dominion as it states, and he gives us power over all the things on the earth. Things that even at the end it says creep and creepy things on the earth. So what they don't state here is that Satan at this time was crawling on his belly throughout the Garden of Eden, or he will crawl on his belly throughout the Garden of Eden. He still has given us authority or power over the devil. We're going to back this up with Luke 9:1. So we're going to turn there. Then he called, I'm sorry, give me this. I have it marked already, so I'll beat you there. Then he called his 12 disciples together and gave them power and authority over all demons and to cure diseases. So 2 times he sends us power. He gives us the authority, power, and he lets us know, I have given you this. But see, what we've done in our spiritual equation, I'm going to set it up how God intended it. Your problem, and here we go, channel your inner algebra 2. We have less than, which remember, alligator eats bigger numbers. So your problems are less than you, and you are less than God. Very true. But see, what we've done here is we, at parts of our life, believe this. This is how God intended it, as we just saw in Genesis and Luke. But see, what we have done is sometimes we get out of our spiritual body and we think that this is how we see it. Now when we, as people, rewrite God's equation, it's this. We have P less than God. That's how we write it. What happened to you? Where are you in this equation? We have taken ourselves out and left it all on God. He created us to take authority just as He intended. He made us in His image and with the ability He had given us to adapt and grow. But in life, we take it out and we see it as this. Now watch what happens. After you take yourself out of the equation, you see your problem as even bigger. You see this. Now watch what happens as we take ourselves out of the equation. The future happens. We tend to see our problems as this represents equal to or less than. We see our problems as slightly less big or slightly less powerful than God, or equal to. Well, I don't know if God can do this. I don't know if He has the power or the authority, because this is a big issue. And see, when we stop seeing it and believing it and speaking it, and doing it God's way, in God's equation, it changes the whole outlook. And watch what can happen. At the end of it, if we continue to see this way, we can see our problems as bigger than God. If we get off the way He intended it, and we stop believing the authority that He's given us over a lot of our problems or issues, we can make them bigger than God Himself. But God has given us the ability to do it, to handle our problems. So even as our situation may get like this, you still, I tell myself, I always forget big alligator eats little alligator. And that's my question to you is, what have you done? So we're going to open our Bibles to Ephesians 6:13. Now, if you've been with God your entire life, grew up in church, that you've heard this verse. If you're new to Christianity, you've heard this verse. If you still haven't accepted Christ, you most likely heard this verse. This is putting on the armor of God. Now, you guys can turn there with me. Ephesians 6:13. And we're going to set you guys up for success with your issues in life. Even if your issues, your problems, sometimes are equal to you, but they are still less than God. As I turn there, this is my little sticky came out, so we're going to read it together. 6:13, Ephesians 6:13. Therefore, we take up the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand when the day of evil comes. And having done all, stand. So, here's us in the equation. We have a job to do. We have a process to do. We need to do all. And God lets us know, so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground. When your problem is equal to you, you have done everything, and after you've done everything, you can stand. But see, we don't want to do everything. We don't even want to do some things. We want to just leave it to God and take ourselves out of the equation. I had a friend who was just confiding in me, and I'm not going to give you the details because it's kind of the opposite of him confiding in me if I tell you what he said, but he was having a marital issue with his wife. And he said, this keeps reoccurring, and I have no idea why. And I said, well, what did she ask you to do? Or what is the problem? And he explains to me the problem. And I said, that's not that big of a deal. Like, not to make light of it, but it's very solvable. And I said, well, what have you done? And he said, well, I prayed about it. And I said, okay. And what else did you do? I've just prayed about it. And we had to fight last night again because they did the same thing. I said, why didn't you just not do it? Why didn't you? She asked you to do one simple thing. He said, well, I prayed that God would just change her so I could continue to do it because I didn't want to stop doing what I was doing. Well, you haven't done anything about it. You're going to continue to have this issue. You're putting that on God when you can solve this problem yourself. You have the authority to change it. You have the authority to change that about yourself. But we take ourselves out of the equation and leave it all on Him. But see, when we do everything, whether from small habits, they train us for the large things to come. It's like a relay race. If we're not doing our part and running and having the baton and going and we're going for it, and our problem's right behind us, if we're not doing everything, we'll never be able to hand the baton off to the Almighty. And once we've done everything and completed our task, if our problem is equal to us, it doesn't matter because it's still smaller than God. But we've done everything, and the day of evil's come, and we can stand. Don't let your problems become bigger than you. Do everything you can, whether it be faith, whether it be prayer, whether it be action. And then if it still is there, you know who you can hand it off to. The next thing we're going to look at, guys and gals, is we're going to look at a derivative. Ooh, big math word. A derivative, by definition, is something that is based on another source. A substance that is derived from a specific compound. Now, Wikipedia didn't give me a lot of answers for examples of derivatives. But one of them was a pencil is a derivative of a tree. Because a tree is made of wood, a pencil is made of wood, the same as a paper is made of wood. A piece of paper is made of wood. So the pencil is a derivative of the tree. And that was the only one I could really understand because it got very into substances and chemicals and I was gone. So a derivative is something. Now, we are derivative of something. We are derivative of our power. Now we're going to set this up. And this is called the power rule in calculus. We have a basic equation. So we have 3x to the 4th. Now let me explain to you the power rule real quick. And let's break it down. Sorry, I saw you flipping your page. Let's break it down. Is everyone with me so far? Because there will be a test at the end of this. So let's break these three things down. So our 3x to the 4th. Our 3 is our constant. Constant. Our x in this situation and in this equation, so easy to draw an x, is our variable, or our situation, or our relationship. Can represent a lot of things. Because in algebra, x can represent numerous numbers. Now, our last one is the 4, the small 4 in the equation, and that represents our power. Dun, 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 dun. Now, our 3 is going to get its power from the 4. So, you can get your power from many different areas, and the 4 is going to change the constant. Now, remember, in this equation, we are the constant. We're supposed to be the constant joy in our family's life. We're supposed to be the constant, whatever it may be, you are a constant. Your situation is the variable, and they are led by a certain power. Now, we said earlier how your power leads you has many different outcomes, and it can come from many different areas. You can choose how your power is, what your power is, and then that chooses your outcome. You can't choose your power and choose your outcome. Your power comes, and then that chooses your outcome. Now, let's look at a couple negative examples of power, whether it be in the workplace, in your relationship, your family, however you want to look at it, in your life, in your social life. If you're not married or in a relationship with this, or in your Christian life. They can be anger, these are the negative ones, the manipulation, fear, shame, abuse, or words, whether it be mean words or kind of you say, well, I'm just a rough person. Well, they're rough words, but some positive ones can be, you're a nice person, you're a good talker, you're an encourager, words of kindness. Now, one of my examples that when I was thinking about this and it came to my mind was my wife when we first got married. She is, not because she can hear me right now, but because it's the truth. She is one of the sweetest people you'll ever meet. She just talks to you and you're just like, wow, I can tell. You know when you can just tell someone's kind, or you can tell when someone's trying to be kind? Like, she just comes off so sweet because she is. Because I love you. But she had said when we had first gotten married, I was unloading some groceries from the car. And it wasn't, they have the big thick paper bag, the big thick plastic bag so you could wrap around and you could try and be manly and pull them. And I had just gotten maybe two or three in each arm. I was bringing them in. And Stephanie had said, Roman, I don't know how you can do that. I can barely get like one bag to carry in. That's amazing how you do it. You're so strong. I love you. Just that. Her words and how she was led by her genuine power, her kindness, it brought me so much joy. And I was like, oh my gosh, I love it. So I was putting like 15 bags on, I was hanging them around my neck, put one on my teeth, and I was dragging them in because her words, her constant, if I was her X and her variable, it changed the whole outlook of our relationship. And it changed how we were walking because of where she got her power from. She was getting her power from God, she was getting her power from being truly nice. But a lot of times we are led by the wrong power. And the power changes the constant. Now let's look at our equation. And our equation, I believe on your chart, I was just looking at yours, Jim. I see it's 3x to the 5th. Now we're going to use that same thing. It really doesn't matter, guys, because I know when we're guys, we're like, we go home and we think about it, or, you know, I know a couple of us are here with our wives, we're like, well, babe, you're a 5 and I'm a constant of 3, and then we turn out this way and it's all your fault. No, these are just examples, fellas, and calculus examples. So, but I want to go with the same example we have. So we have 3x to the 5th. So when I go back, and excuse me, 5 is our power, 3 is our constant, and x is our variable. Now we're going to find the derivative. The derivative is represented, and I'm sorry, this is where it gets a little tricky, is f of x. Okay, so the derivative, just follow along with this, ignore this, but this has to be correct. I've done this before. A couple math people were like, make sure you add that. So the derivative, and watch this. It is different than what we're normally used to. But watch what the power does to the constant here. So the derivative of 3x to the 5th is 15x to the 4th. Okay? So what happened in this equation? If you're being led by the wrong power, your constant got bigger. But what happened with that? Now let's say you use, in a relationship, manipulation. Or in your social life, manipulation. Or in your workplace. All these apply. You manipulated the situation. You, as the constant, felt good. Well, I got the outcome that I wanted. But what happened to your power? Your power got smaller because the rule is you take this 5 and you multiply it by 3. Makes 15. 15. The rule that happens to 5, it's called n1, n minus 1. So we take 1 away from our power. Now watch this, and then we're still left with that. Now following with me, we're going to continue to break this power down. Okay? You can take a derivative of a derivative. Fancy, I know. Okay, so we have our 3x to the 5th becomes, we're going to do it this way, 15x to the 4th becomes, oh, good math here, 60x to the 3rd becomes, we're going to drag it over here in a minute once we get there, 180x to the 2nd. Now you're seeing a pattern here, and you're learning something too, so take that away if we don't take anything else away. We are learning some calculus here. Now watch this. We have 180, and we're just going to drag this up here. We're going to keep the same rule so we can keep going. Okay, x to the 2nd. Now, the derivative of that, I want to connect it, little OCD, is 360x. Excuse me. X. We have 360x. This is the derivative of all that power. If you're being led by the wrong power, where it can go. Your constant is massive. Huge. You're feeling great about yourself. You think you're untouchable. You think you're unstoppable. You think, I'm the smartest person in the room. I run everything. If it's in a relationship, I run my spouse. I do this because I'm the boss. I'm the smartest. I'm the, I use money. I use this. I use that. Whatever it is, you're being led by the wrong power. You'll see where the outcome is. And that's how we can tell in our lives what power we've really been led by. Now we're going to continue with a massive 360x. But we notice here, our power's gone. We've used it so much in so many situations, or to the same situation, that our power has no power. Well, we're a big old puffed up, cheap 360. Now let's take a derivative of this. And remember, x is our situation. What's the derivative of this? When you have no more power left to use. What happened to our x? My joke for this is, if it's cheesy, if your ex is your relationship with your spouse, your ex becomes your ex. EX. The joke was worth more than what you guys gave me. So we have our 360. Our constant is now alone. Our x is gone, and we have no more power. Because we were led by the wrong source of power. You'll see that in some situations of your life where you truly reflect on seasons in your life or a season you're going through right now. Where is your power coming from? If your power is coming from the wrong source, this is your outcome. Because any source that is not of God has a number and has a limitation to it. But watch what happens next. And we're going to use this as our biblical reference. We're going to look in Revelations. We're going to look in Revelations chapter 3. Thank you. Chapter 3, verse 14. I had it written here, but I honestly had it written 14 and it was in 15. It's 15, I had it written 14, excuse me. So we're going to look in Revelations 3, 15. Now God is naming the churches in John the Revelator's vision, and he's naming a specific church. And this is a good one, because this is where the church they had the right power from. I know your works, and he's talking to the church of Laodicea, to the angel of the church of Laodicea. And if I butchered that, that happens. I know your works, that you are neither hot, nor cold. I could wish you were cold or hot. So then because you are lukewarm, and this is a very famous verse, neither hot nor cold, I will vomit you out of my mouth. But here's where we get into it. 17. Because you say, I am rich, have become wealthy, your power, and in need of nothing, and do not know that you are wretched. And this is what the angel's saying to them. Because you, the people, think, I am rich, I have become wealthy, I am in need of nothing. And I do not know, and you do not know as the church, that you are wretched, miserable, poor, blind, and naked. I counsel you, this is what God says, to buy from me gold refined in the fire, that you may be truly rich, and in white garments. That church was getting their power from something else. But truly their power meant nothing and had no power. And God said, I am supposed to be your power. And when you use me as the true source of power, we're going to look right now what happens when we use God as our source of power. Looking for my eraser. So when we use God as our true source of power, we end up having a very similar equation. So we're going to start back with our basic equation of 3x to the 5th. Now, we're going to break it down this way. God, remember God is represented, I wanted to make sure I have a clear vision for this. God is represented as infinity. If we're using God as our source of power, watch what's going to happen to our equation. 3, that's us, we're still the constant, excuse me, make a big 3. 3x, and then God is our power, so we represent it as infinity. Now watch what happens to the derivative of 3x to the infinity. Remember, we multiply our power by our constant, and this is what happens. We're left with infinity x to the infinity. Our constant still grew, but it became a number that was immeasurable, and our infinity stayed the same because we used the power rule. N minus 1. Oh, infinity minus 1 is still infinity. God can take some of himself and put it in you and say, but I haven't lost anything because I'm still God. But what happened was your constant didn't become just a big puffed up number. It became a number that is innumerable. Infinity doesn't have 6 decimal places. It doesn't have 17 commas. Infinity is infinity. God is God. He is the Alpha, the Omega, the A to Z. Now watch what happens here. We do it again. If you took the same derivative, another derivative, you still are left with this. Whoop. Crazy. See, if you're led by the right source of power, God, He takes you to a place you never thought. As a constant, you thought I could only be a bigger number, a bigger, better version of myself. The best version of me that I could be, but God said no. When you use me as your constant, as your source of power, I change the constant into who I've called them to be. And it's a number more imaginable, a person more imaginable than you thought you could ever become. Now watch what happens here. Let's say you're still using the source of power, but we live in this world, and some days, some seasons, more than a day, can be a year, can be 5, can be an hour. We're having a bad day, we're having a bad month, some situations in our life are going on. So we're pretty negative. We're a negative 3x, but our power is still God. Watch what God does to that. Now check this out. God says, you're negative right now, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to become a negative infinity. Doesn't mean He's a negative God. And watch what happens here. You take that, if you know basic multiplication, a negative times a negative is a positive. And look at our derivative of this. See what happened is God said, even though you were down in this season, you were still using the right source of power. So I became what you needed me to become in your life. And I changed you from a negative back to an infinity because you're constant. You're the constant even though you're negative. I'm the power. And with me as your power, you become a positive. And you know what it is? And you know how that shows us? Because He sent His Son to die on the cross for you and me. And when His Son died, He went to hell and He took the keys of death and destruction. He became a negative for that brief moment. He went down into the negative to come up so that we could live forever with Him. And be positive. Now watch what happens here at the very end. Now remember, our lonely X is our situation. Our variable could be our relationship. What happens when we're have the right power? That's our equation, our godly equation. Now look what happens to our situation when infinity is multiplied by any situation, any number, because x in this situation and this equation is a number. We just learned what happened to our constant. And our constant, when our power is God, makes the whole equation God. What are you being led by today? Where's your source of power? And are we using the true source of power in our lives? Now we're going to pray. As we shut down the camera, we're going to pray. Thank you guys for joining us online. Thank you guys for joining us here.